Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Atheist Experience. I'm your host, Matt Dillahunty. Joining me this week, Tracie Harris. Welcome back.
Hey.
And Tracie Harris and her magical jars, which we'll get to here in a little while. Thanks, Nicholas. Appreciate it. I should ask him how the weather was in Singapore. That was going to be my shtick. You know, somebody calls in from outside. I ask them, "How's the weather?" "Ah, you should be in Austin."
Yeah,
I had, you know, I got short sleeves and had the air on.
And I'm wearing a scarf.
Yeah, she's wearing a scarf, and I'm in short
I'm always
sleeves.
freezing in the studio, though. That's why.
It can get a little chilly in here,
All
except
right.
in the summer. So
Wait, let's do the first chunk.
yeah,
and
let's
okay.
get started. So if you're on the line, please hang on because we want to get started on the subject for today, and you don't necessarily have to talk about that.
Okay. Today
All
I
you.
brought a model that I made that is meant to demonstrate particular fallacies. And I find it interesting because in my mind this thing demonstrates a load of fallacies. It's not just one. It's like handles a lot of them. And the way these are set up, what they model is, in this jar there is existent dice.
Can we get zoomed in a little bit?
If you can see them. It's a jar with dice inside it. Is there a close-up or is it not working? Okay, and then in the second jar, I have non-existent dice. And in the final jar, I have transcendent supernatural dice. And for the sake of the first, I guess, game or experiment or a demonstration, we're going to accept that the supernatural transcendent dice, in fact, are existent. So we're going to say that in this jar are supernatural transcendent dice. In this jar is non-existent dice, and in this jar we have existent dice. I was going to bring a kitchen scale, but I think I can describe that part of it without demonstrating it, and people will understand what I was going to do, which was to take the dice out of the jar, weigh the jar, put the dice back in the jar, weigh the jar, and demonstrate that the die add weight so that they have mass and weight. But you can also see that they reflect light, that we can observe them because they reflect light, and also they make a considerably annoying tonal sound, so that they do make, sound. They are responsible for sound waves when they clink around and hit the jar. So they have some substantial material existence that is fairly well demonstrated, just simply inherently by the dice. And so for the first thing I want to do, I want to put the camera on Matt for just a second. Just on Matt. Okay. And now I want to come back to the jars. Okay. Now I've put the jars all together, and what I want to ask to consider is what we want to do now is separate these things into two groups. We want to separate it into a group of existent items with the assumption that the supernatural transcendent dice exist, and non-existent items, which would be the group with the non-existent dice.
Okay.
And so my question is, how do we do that?
We guess. I'm going to guess that those are the ones that don't exist.
Well, how do we know if you're right?
You could just take it on faith.
In other words, we have no criteria with which to determine whether or not Matt chose the right jar, whether or not he pulled the non-existent dice out, or whether he actually pulled the existent transcendent and supernatural dice out. We can't test it because the supernatural dice have the exact same attributes as the non-existent dice. There is no difference between the two. And the problem when we define something as supernatural and transcendent and then we give it all of the same material qualities as nothing in a context of dice,
Right.
we basically eviscerate the term existence and exist because we no longer have any criteria that determines what exists from what does not exist. And so we have to kill the word exist in order to say that supernatural transcendent dice exist. It no longer has meaning because it's no longer discernible from non-existence. So I wanted to just sort of demonstrate that. We've talked about it before on the show, but I wanted to kind of show how it works.
Yeah, and oddly enough, if I'd have grabbed this one and said, this is the one that doesn't exist, that would have just been stupid.
Right.
And this isn't a matter
Right.
of just being able to see it.
Right.
And as you mentioned, you know, there's
can
weight.
hear it, you can
doesn't
weigh
matter.
it, you
Whatever
can-
characteristics
Right.
you give to
Right.
something that which exists in reality. I mean,
Right.
that's what we're talking about is within the construct of reality. What is real? And in part, you could make the argument that maybe one of these contains more molecules of air than that one. And
Sure.
we're unable to discern which one's which right now.
Sure.
You're correct. And that's a limitation on our ability to discern at this moment, at this table.
Right.
But in a lab, we could.
Right.
And then you could say that, well, maybe there's just, our inability to discern the difference between a transcendent existent object and a non-existent object is just a limitation of our ability to discern. Maybe it is.
Yeah, fine. We still need criteria for existence.
Yeah.
So if that is,
The
if
point,
existence,
though, is that if it's beyond our ability to discern,
Right.
you can't make any statement about which one is.
Existence
so you can't, it
is-
exists, you just can't tell it.
existence is whatever is materially manifest,
Yeah.
and what is not is considered non-existent until such time as it demonstrates a material manifestation. It is possible that there are supernatural dye in this jar.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, if we can't tell them apart from non-dye,
Yeah. And there's-
what is the difference between nothing and the something that is the same as nothing?
Yeah, and I'm trying to avoid getting hung up on the visible or the tactile or anything else like
Right.
that. The analogy here, if we remove these,
Right.
and we just have these two, and one of them has transcendent existent dice, and the other one has nothing, there's no dice, non-existent dice. What's happening when you talk to people who believe in a God or who believe in the supernatural, they're saying, this is the one that has the transcendent dice in it, and I can tell. And I'm sorry that you can't tell, but I know that this is the one. And, okay, how do you know? You can get all kinds of different answers.
Right, and we're gonna
These
talk about
dice
that.
have revealed themselves to me.
Right.
Really? Then do it again.
Well, that's one of the things I have here later, but we can talk
I'm
about
jumping
it.
ahead.
That's okay. One of the things, if you switch over to the next page on number 5, one of the things I said is,
Although,
if I feel or believe, oh, okay. Do you want to go to that?
yeah.
Okay.
So keep that burning in your mind for a little while, because we have on the line a caller from last week, Matt Slick from.
Thanks.
I gotta
Thanks.
get to Tracy stuff.
Okay.
Now it's all yours.
All right.
Have fun.
Good. I wanted to, even though we did it last time, I want to go ahead and do it again. I want to do,
Hey.
the idea here is that we have 3 jars. We have a jar that has existent dice. We have a jar that has supernatural, transcendent dice. And we have a jar of nothing. There's nothing in this jar. And what we did last time is we just sort of mixed them all up. And then I asked Matt, which jar has the real dice?
That one.
Okay. And which jar has the supernatural transcendent dice?
I don't know,
Why not?
because they look the same to me. But can I shake it?
Yeah, go for it.
This one's not making any noise, so that one must have the supernatural dice.
Okay, but this one doesn't make noise either.
Oh, okay.
Now, let me just say
I'm gonna think about
that even if these die had some weird property like water where they were completely, you couldn't see them, let's say that they weren't visible. If you take these out of the jar and you weigh it, the jar weighs something different
There you go.
than when you put
One
the
of these
dye
is
in
gonna
it.
be heavier, I can tell. Go ahead.
And the other thing is, like you said, you shake the jar and you can hear the jar. If you wanted to know if there was, for example, oxygen in a jar like this, you could light a match and see if it burned or not. It doesn't have to just be visible. There's all kinds of ways that these dye manifest.
I think they weigh about this. This one's a little bit heavier, just a bit. Maybe that's the one with the dice in it.
Okay. The problem with these is that if you have something that you define as something that has no measurable manifestation, and we don't know how to measure it, and there's nothing that you can provide that is how we identify it from nothing, how do you identify it from nothing? It's the same as nothing until you can find a way to demonstrate that it's something.
I would ask God to tell me which of those has this, but unfortunately that spoon is still a spoon. From last week, still a spoon.
Okay.
And
But the demonstration here is just to say that if you're going to tell me that something is existing, and then you're going to say that it can exist even though it has no manifesting qualities that can be measured, what you're really saying then is that we can't differentiate something that is not existent from something that exists but has no existent qualities. And so then what happens is I can't tell the thing that manifests and exists from the things that don't manifest and exist, which means that I can't say nothing. There's nothing that I can say doesn't exist because maybe it exists but it simply doesn't manifest. And at that point, existence now cannot discount anything. All you have to do is say it has no manifesting traits,
right.
no measurable traits, and suddenly existence means nothing.
Yeah.
Because things that have you can't tell things that exist from things that don't exist anymore, and now the term is just completely
right.
castrated. So it's kind of sad that the only way you can argue for the existence of something that you believe in is to simply try to argue that existence means nothing.
Yeah.
It's like, no, existence means something. And if you don't think that it means something, think about the idea that manifestation is the attribute that separates the items that exist from those that do not. If you don't agree with it, think about how you live your life, and do you accept that the things that are manifesting in front of you, the things that you can identify and verify and measure, are there, and the things that you don't aren't. You don't come to a screeching halt at a green light because of the car you can't see just ran in front of you. You know, the invisible car that drove in front of you doesn't make you slam your brakes on. And the car that does cut you off at that light, you will slam your brakes on because it manifests. You live your life every day identifying things that are and rejecting things that aren't. And yet when it comes to something as simple as saying, you know, is there anything in this jar? If I say it's supernatural and transcendent, suddenly, okay, well that's this, you know, and it's logical to believe in it.
I changed what's in those jars now. I took the supernatural transcendent dice out. One of them now has a soul, and the other one has Zeus's little finger.
You're messing up my model.
All right. Here,
Put it back.
I'm going to dump Zeus's little finger.
Okay.
I think it's out.
Okay. Yeah, if a supernatural existent item does not meet the criteria we use to justify existent items, what becomes our basis for labeling anything as existent? Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
It's just too much.
Okay.
It's the single most perfect explanation of this. When she called to tell me she would do this on the show or sent me an email, I was like, yeah, it's perfect.
No, it is. And so the thing with this, I'm not going to belabor this any longer because we actually did this part of it on the last show I was on.
Great.
So if you want to go back and look and see more of that. The next thing that you can do with this fallacy model is you take these two jars, set them aside. You take this jar, and I say to Matt, guess how many die are in jar 1?
21.
Okay. I'm going to guess 150,000.
Wait, I miss. Talking about dice, right?
Yeah, in the jar.
Okay.
You're saying 21, I'm saying 150,000.
Want to put some money on it?
What this part of the fallacy model demonstrates is that, Matt, do you know how many die are in this jar?
Nope.
Okay. In the theory of the model, neither of us know how many die are in this jar. So does it make sense, since neither of us really know how many die are in this jar, that any quantity guessed is just as valid as any other quantity?
No.
Why not?
Because one of them's just batshit crazy.
All right, but why?
Because of what we do know about dice and that jar, we know that one of the guesses is beyond the possible
Right.
limits of what could possibly be in there.
Right.
There's
It is
clearly 100 million.
just because we don't know how many die are in this jar does not mean that every guess is just as valid. Some guesses are completely ridiculous.
Yep.
Because you do know something about jars and you know something about dice. And as long as you have some parameters in place, it is ridiculous to guess there's 150,000 die in this jar.
I'm gonna possibly get ahead of you.
Go ahead.
Can you grab one of the empty ones?
Sure.
No, not the empty, not that one. The one with the actual supernatural transcendent
Okay,
dice in it.
here you go.
This has the supernatural transcendent dice in it.
Right.
Guess how many are in this one?
I don't have a clue. Should I take a guess? Do you want me to just
yeah,
wing it?
Guess.
1,050,000.
And I'm going to guess 30. Our guesses are now equally valid
Right.
because the information that we would use to make our guess is no longer applicable
Right.
because we don't know anything at all about transcendent
Supernatural
supernatural
dice.
dice. There could be 1 million of them in there. And the funny thing is that when the people make these arguments with regard to religion, they take that as a proud
Right.
defining moment of, I believe there's 1 million transcendent supernatural dice in here, and I also believe that I don't know anything or completely understand those dice. What?
And the guy over here that says that there's only 50, he's not a true believer in the transcendent dice. He's got, that's error.
Iceberg. He looked in and saw 50 and stopped looking.
Right.
I mean, those are the types of arguments you get.
So when you get into something like,
We're
I don't
counting
know,
those at the end.
the beginning, I can tell you how many there are. There's the beginning, whatever, universal
I'm
origins.
going to count them anyway.
And people will say, it's just as reasonable to say a God did it as to say not say a God did it. It's like, well, we do actually know some things about the universe. In fact, I'm part of the universe, and I know some things about myself. So it's not like nobody knows anything about the universe. You live in it, you work in it, you deal with matter and energy every single day. We do know quite a bit about it. And there's certain things that can be, understood about it that we have a good grasp of, and probably things that are more theoretical, but the fact is, it doesn't make any wild guess about universal origins suddenly credible just because you can say, well, nobody really knows what happened before the Big Bang.
Right.
So therefore, it could be Zeus. Well, yeah, but there could be 150,000 die in here too.
In that case, though, and I think this actually touches on a slightly different, I can still see part of whatever the hell is on that figure. In that case,
Guessing lies from Mars.
I think this touches on a slightly different aspect of this, in which, for example, with regard to Big Bang cosmology,
Sure.
the only fair answer is to say we
Don't know.
And so when somebody asserts an answer or two, like, for example, God or Yahweh, those two answers I wouldn't say are equally probable, but there's a distinct difference between which answer is more accurate, I don't know, or God.
Right.
And in this case, the I don't know case, I'm saying, I don't know. I'm not even going to be able to give you too much in the way of characteristics before this. This is something that is actually beyond our ability to really assess. In the future,
Right.
it may be possible. Maybe we'll learn something new about science that will give us the ability to extrapolate further than the point time, et cetera. But when I say God did it, I mean something by God. I'm not just saying I don't know. I'm saying I know, and it's this thing right here, and
This thing right here.
I have some definition of it. It is then the case where we're not just talking about something completely abstract that we don't have any concept of. The person making the assertion has in their mind some concept, some list of characteristics that apply, that fit the label God. In that case, you are required, if we're going to have any conversation, to tell me what those characteristics are. Because if in the course of assessing those characteristics, we find that some of them are logically contradictory, we can eliminate that as a possibility even if we don't know anything else about it.
Sure.
And if you come up with characteristics that contradict other known aspects of reality, Then we can...
Well, the other thing, though, is when you have a thing like a God that has no manifesting or measurable characteristics, how do you factor that into your theory or your equation?
Yeah.
How do you use the information that is not there? I mean, I don't know. It's like I had a quote here from Austin Klein's site. All such statements are causal shorthand for a more elaborate and technical statement. This alleged entity has no place in any scientific equations, plays no role in any scientific explanations, cannot be used to predict any events, does not describe anything or force that has yet been detected, and there are no models of the universe in which its presence is either required, productive, or useful.
Yep.
I mean, what are you talking about? You're saying this did it. This created the universe. Well, you've just given me no information. So anyway, how many die are in the jar?
I said 21.
That's
I'm
right.
counting them. I'm not just taking your word for it.
I know. But you know there's not 150,000.
Yeah.
That's not even debatable. You know, if anybody would believe me,
Technically, you could debate it, but
Right.
we'd have a lot of fun with that.
it's not reasonably debatable.
Yes.
Any reasonable person would know there cannot be 150,000 die in here.
Not 150,000 that dies that
Those
size.
die. These are the real die we're talking about.
Yeah.
And that is important to the model, is that we're talking specifically about die,
Yes.
these die,
We have defined die as
those.
one of those objects that's in it.
And let's see. Okay, this is where I hope I don't make a
And
mess.
I don't even need to know what they're made of.
This is something else you can do with the fallacy model.
Okay.
There should be 25. Okay. What are the odds that they would fall exactly as they did?
Holy crap. I'm not good enough at math to figure that out. Actually, do you just mean what numbers are up or their actual positions?
The position counts. Position counts. This is like die 1, die 2, die 3, die 4, which throws the odds way up.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Because when you first brought
I
this
started.
fallacy model,
I actually started calculating this like when I first did this, and I said like, okay, you've got the first die, and it has 6 positions. Then you have the second die, which has 6 positions on the 6 positions. So now you're up to 36 positions.
No. That's only calculating what number is up. I'm talking about you
Oh,
in this
okay.
particular
Yeah,
arrangement. The distance,
Okay,
the spacing,
I was talking
the
position and
the
all right.
orientation.
I was looking at it in terms of like if you had 2 die and you get like a 1 and a 2,
Right.
that it's not the same as a 2 and a 1. That's what I was calling position, like die 1, die
6 to the 25th, I don't know.
So it gets huge.
Yeah.
And so there's just astronomically huge odds, and you can just add more die and make it just more and more incredible. So the question here is, does the reality that there are very low odds that they would have fallen exactly as they did indicate that the outcome was impacted in some way by an intelligent designer?
No. But there sure are a lot of 5s out
3s I'm seeing too. I'm thinking there must be something to that, right? I mean, otherwise, how could all those 5s have come up?
there. Yahtzee.
There you go. If I accept that the odds of the die falling as they did are too great to have been random, does that impart any more purpose or meaning to my existence than I had before?
No.
If it does so only in my mind, which it would, because there's no real reason it would, wasn't the capacity to overlay meaning onto an external reality always within my head, whether or not the die land without aid from a supernatural intelligence? So in other words, if I interpret this to be the product of a supernatural intelligence that created it all, still whatever it means to me is whatever it means to me. And my life still has whatever meaning I impart. And if I find out later that it really was just random roll of dice, that there was no intelligence behind the outcome, does that mean I can't have meaning now? If I learn that it wasn't an intelligently designed roll, that means I created the meaning previously
Right.
in my own head.
And yet the meaning didn't change.
Well, it can change, but the point is
but you're the one
I
changing.
made up the meaning
Yes.
before. So whatever meaning I thought I had was really out of my own mind, even when I believed there was an intelligent designer behind it. If there really isn't, I'm making that meaning up. And so after I find out there isn't one, my life can have just as much made-up meaning now as it did before.
Yes.
There's no reason that my life must be stripped of meaning because that aspect of my view changes. Anyway, this is part of what you were talking about before, and that's why I brought up templates,
Yeah.
about the card template. If you weren't familiar with the game of poker and someone dealt you that royal flush, it would be meaningless to you. You might see the pattern of hearts, or it just depends. If you've never seen cards before and you don't know what they look like, it's the first time you've looked at a deck of cards, you don't even know that there aren't hearts. You just got a handful of hearts. According to what you know, it could all be hearts. The whole deck could be hearts.
Right.
So you have no idea about the meaning behind it unless you already have a preconceived template of what is a good poker hand. And so if we had a template laid out on the table, and then these die hit, and it was exactly like the template on our first roll, that would be pretty amazing.
It'd be whatever the odds are.
Right.
Yeah.
Because now we got a template.
But it's still possible.
Yes, it's possible, but we have a template.
Mm-hmm.
So we're saying, what would be the odds of rolling this? And then we roll it. It's like, holy crap, we really rolled that. I would be blown away if I was able to roll that on a first try. But the thing that gets me is, without a template, there's no, the full house is not significant if there's no full house template in your brain. And if there's no template laying on this table to match these die, any roll is just as good as any other roll. It's just as many odds to roll this pattern as to roll this pattern. There's nothing significant about one pattern or the other except in your brain.
Right.
And that is something I come across a lot with ID, is the idea that because things rolled out the way they did, suddenly that means there's a God.
The interesting thing about this is you can actually use this for a slightly different example, and I promise we're going to get the calls soon because there's only like 20 minutes left in the show. But pick a number from 1 to 6.
7.
What? 7?
2.
2. We're going to roll all 2s. All right. 2, 2, 2, 2.
Yeah, there's one.
2.
There's a couple.
2. I beat the odds for a number of 2s. Now I'm going to take everything that's not a 2.
Is there 7?
There are 6 of them.
No, there's 7.
No, there's 6.
There's 7.
All right, there's 7. He predicted the number of 2s without even
I'm
realizing it.
totally wigging it.
So now we roll again, and there's, well, look at this.
Wow.
I'm beating the odds really well. There's 2, 2, and there's
Over
another
here.
2, and another 2, and look at all the 6s in there.
Yeah, yeah.
There's like 8 6s in that little. All right, so now we're getting closer to being all 2s. So that's 2 rolls.
Yeah, yeah. Doing good.
Uh-oh. 2, 2, 2. That's 3 rolls. And you can keep doing this. And hopefully everybody watching can see. That's a 2 and a 2. That it won't take entirely too many rolls by this progressive system to get to the point where all of these dice are 2s.
There's a
look at
couple
this. 1,
2s.
2. There's another one. We are down to just 5 dice.
Yeah.
That's all, that's what,
Yeah, yeah.
is that 5 rolls or 6 rolls? It's not a perfect analogy or no
Got
2s.
nothing there.
And I'm not going to roll these forever because it's noisy.
Okay, but you get the idea.
Yeah, the point.
Eventually
it's not a
you'll roll all
perfect analogy
2s.
the way evolution works, but it's kind of close because it's not like many people would provide a caricature of evolution, as Frank did this morning, of, oh, I think this thing just spontaneously happened. That's not it. I kept the good traits. I kept
Right.
these particular things
Right.
and re-rolled
Okay.
the others, and some of them come up 2s. I
Well-
might even
well,
have
wait
grabbed
a
some
second.
2s with them.
What this is the plane goes down and
that's 6.
200 people die, but a baby survived.
Yeah.
And so the baby survived, and so, wow, God is awesome. But
Yeah.
the 100 and, whatever, 250 people or whatever that died, you just ignore those. God had nothing to do with that. He just saved the baby. But those dead people, that's what happens. The thing here now is we're going to take one, and I'll hurry this up because it doesn't take too long. And we're going to take, which one had the supernatural die?
The one by the closest to the mug.
Okay.
Sorry.
So we're going to take the supernatural transcendent die, and everyone in this room is going to think really hard to ask the supernatural transcendent die to influence the roll of this dice.
Okay.
I got one die in my hand, and you're going to pick a number, and we're going to see if the transcendent die do it.
2.
Okay.
I almost said 3.
Now,
Does it
wait a
count? 'Cause
second.
3 was the first thing I thought of. Maybe
Well,
it heard me
let's
before.
see. According to this, if I don't get the desired outcome, it's not really evidence that it didn't work. It simply means that the transcendent die know better than we do what we should have rolled.
Well, yeah.
And-
or it could have been that it heard what I was thinking.
And
before.
also, I can't test or control what the supernatural die actually do. They're kind of, they have their own agenda.
Let
And
me
they
ask it again.
Okay, yeah, sometimes you have to.
Please, supernatural die,
Be really
Give me a
contrite.
5.
Tell it that you're not worthy.
I humble myself before your jarredness.
Oh, no.
6. He won up. He gave me more than I asked for. It's a miracle.
Now, wait a second. You're not being, I'm not
You don't
feeling
think
the
I'm
love.
sincere?
I think,
Here.
come on. Call it glorious and,
You are the hottest transcendent die ever.
That's what it took. It's female. It's a goddess.
You have to flatter it.
It's
which
a
is curious, and
goddess.
It seems to be what happens with
Okay.
a lot of religions. You
Right.
have to get into this sycophantic.
So that's the thing. If you really, really want it, and it really is what's best for you, and you keep asking the transcendent die, you will get the thing that's best. It might not be what you think, and it might take a couple of, attempts, and you might have to ask and ask, but you'll get what you're asking for if it's the right thing for you. If it's not, you won't. And then, really quickly, the rest of these aren't really fallacy models, but it's just quick questions. If you don't believe that there are supernatural transcendent die in this jar, would you change your mind if I told you a story about how wonderful they are?
They're hot, believe me. They just hooked me up.
What if I relayed to you that other people believe that there are supernatural die in this jar? Does that change what's in the jar?
No.
And if I tell you that there's, 100,000 people that believe there are transcendent die in that jar, does it change what's actually in the jar?
Nope.
Okay.
And it doesn't change my
But
perception.
wait, I feel really strongly, I just know in my heart that there are supernatural transcendent die in that jar. Does it change what's in that jar?
Nope.
Okay.
And it doesn't change what I think about what's in
Does
it.
it in any way affect the reality of whether or not that item is actually in there? If I get 100 other people to agree, if I convince you that there's supernatural die in that jar, does it change what's in that jar?
Nope.
Okay. What if I tell you that after you die, you're going to go to a heavenly Las Vegas where you will win at every game and eat great buffets for all eternity? Will you then agree that there are supernatural transcendent dice in this jar?
No, but that is the best heaven I've ever heard of.
Well, it's dice, so I did a Vegas theme. What if I tell you that not believing is going to result in your worst nightmare for eternity after you die? Will that make you believe that there's supernatural transcendent dice in that jar?
No.
Would it change the fact that there are or are not supernatural transcendent dice in that jar?
No.
What if I point out that you don't know everything? Does that make you believe there's supernatural transcendent dice in that jar?
No.
What if I accuse you of being closed-minded? Does that make you believe there's supernatural transcendent dice in that jar?
No.
What if I tell you that only bad people don't believe in the supernatural dice? Are you convinced now?
I'm bad to the bone, and no.
If I could do something that you couldn't explain, and I say it's because the supernatural transcendent die gave me the power to do it, are you going to believe that there's something in that jar?
Nope.
And if I could do something that was really wild and hard to explain or even impossible to explain, and I believed it was because supernatural transcendent die in that jar gave me the power, does that change the fact of what is or is not in that jar?
Absolutely not.
Okay. And I think that's all of it.
Sweet.
And if anybody has other things, if you want to think of things that you can do with these and want to write in and let me know what else you can do with the fallacy model, I'm open because I think it's kind of an interesting model.
And by the way, I've patented this. No one else is allowed to sell supernatural transcendent jars of supernatural transcendent items without giving me royalties.
I'm going to say feel free to use this model and let me know if you
But
think
you
that
can't sell
if
the
you can
jar.
think of other arguments or counter apologetics that can be demonstrated with this model. Let me know.
You can sell the jars for the price of the jars. You can't mark them up because they contain supernatural transcendent items.
Okay.
Even really nice ones. I'm just saying.
Okay, that's all I got.
We got Ken in Santa Barbara. Thanks so much for waiting. What do you got?
Hey, what's up?
How you doing?
Hey.
Hey, I just wanted to, as far as your demonstration, I really disagree with just about everything.
With
Here's
everything
why I
in this
disagree.
dice demonstration?
Just with the whole meaning of it. You said that it's because we can't explain it or whatever the case may be. And I'll say it like this. Can you explain to me why is 2 plus 2 equal 4?
Because we define that 2 items are 2 items, and that when you have this many items, we call that 4, and that happens to be 2 and 2. So is that explain
where's
it?
the... No. The point is can you measure numbers? Can you explain where they came from?
A number is a symbol for actual amount of items, yes. I have 2 jars here.
Uh-huh.
Here they
Well,
are. Here's
and if we
2.
were in Mexico, we'd
I can
have
demonstrate
ghost
2
jars.
to you.
Yeah. Well, okay. What about the P and P is like these logical absolutes?
What does any of that have to do with the model where you
Right,
just
why
said you
is the
disagree
model
with it?
flawed? What's the flaw in the
No,
model?
no, no. I meant as far as the philosophy of it, not the actual.
What's wrong with the
demonstration.
philosophy that's demonstrated by the model?
Because you're talking about how like we can't,
I'm talking
we
about
don't know.
existent items. Existent items is what this model demonstrates. Now, I'm not talking about symbols or mental concepts. I'm talking about an existent item.
But yeah, but wasn't your point was to show that that's God or something like that. That's how.
Right,
people
what I'm
go
saying
about-
is that if you're trying to say that God is a mental concept like the number 2, I'm fine with that. I believe, in fact, that God does exist as a mental concept. I don't believe he exists in the same way that these dice exist. And I think that if somebody's going to tell me that God exists in objective reality outside their head, then they need to be able to demonstrate that, or else they're castrating the word exist.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I mean, do you believe in the existence of numbers and
Numbers
these
are mental
mathematical
concepts
proofs?
that align with quantities that can be demonstrated.
These logical absolutes. Do you believe that they even exist? Then?
They are demonstrable, yes.
The logical absolutes don't exist as entities. They are simply truths.
But they're also demonstrable truths.
Just like,
I mean, this jar is a jar. It's not a dog.
yeah, it is a jar, and it is one jar. So both the quantity and the essence of what the item is
Yeah,
are
and it's
true,
not a jar.
whether or not
Yeah, but-
anybody's around to notice it or not.
Yeah, but these logical absolutes exist outside of our mind, or we can think of them and all this stuff.
They don't exist as a thing. That's what
Yeah,
I'm
they're not
saying.
part. They're not part of objective reality like an existent dice. If you're
But
saying that you have something that exists and it doesn't manifest, and you're trying to tell me that it is an item like other items exist, then I simply can't accept that. If you have nothing I can measure, I don't know what you're saying existence means. What does existence mean to you?
Well, the same thing with, like I said, the logical absolutes. They still exist, but we cannot. We can't measure them or anything like that. It's still there. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
They are not objective items. What I'm saying is, how do you define existence?
How do I define God?
How do you define existence?
Existence?
Yeah, how do you tell what exists from what doesn't exist? Can you do that?
Well,
Can you? Are you able to tell if something exists or if it doesn't? Or do you walk around in life thinking that you don't know what is and isn't real?
well, as far as logic goes, I just understand. It's like 2 plus 2 equal 4. I understand that exists, but I can't see it. I can't make a scientific experiment.
Can you tell if there is a chair in a room?
Yeah, the physical sense. We're talking about the abstract.
No, I'm not. I'm
No,
talking
she's
about
not.
God. People say God exists as an objective being, a existent thing, not a
No, that's
mental.
not true. That's not true.
It is true. I've talked to people who said it.
They call all
Really?
the time.
Yes.
Okay, maybe.
Okay, so what is God to you?
Well, he's not physical. He's an absolute disembodied mind.
What is a
He's
disembodied
first thought.
mind?
What is a distant
Well,
body?
How do you
Well,
measure a
okay.
disembodied mind?
Well, we can't measure our own mind.
Yes,
so-
it happens. Your mind is a function of your brain.
Exactly.
So without
So
a brain, how do you
Take away
measure?
the brain, and that's what he is. He's the mind.
Without a
Just the
brain,
mind.
but a mind is a product of a brain. So where is the brain that's producing this mind?
It doesn't have to. It's the first cause.
Have you ever seen a mind without a brain?
Well, no,
Okay, then why are you saying that there is such a thing?
because there has to be logically a first cause. And when you go back to the very beginning,
Why does there have to be a first cause?
because the same reason why 2 plus 2 equals 4. It's just the way it is. There has to be logically a first cause.
I don't understand what you're saying and why.
Well, okay, you guys understand logic, right? You accept the logical absolutes. You accept that 2 plus 2 equals 4, and that's just the way it is.
See, the difference here is that I actually know what the logical absolutes are, and 2 plus 2 equals 4 has
It's
nothing
not
to
one
do
of
with
them.
it. I also
Well-
happen to understand the first cause arguments and know that it's not something that is just the way it is.
What do you mean? Yes.
What do you mean by first cause?
Well, it's very simple. Well, it's something that's like, okay. Let me further explain and define what
You
it
have
is.
1 minute because we're running out of time and I got other callers. Go for it.
Great. All right. He is like the logical absolutes, but he's not the same. It's used synonymously, but he's not actually the logical absolute. They're a part of his nature, and it's just in his mind. So
What the hell does that have to do with
abstract-
first cause? Now you're talking about something different. Now you're talking about God.
No,
and
I'm
logical
describing him. I'm just describing him.
You can't even measure him. How do you describe
How do
him?
you know? How can you describe something
We
without
talked about
telling
that.
us how you know it's there?
If it has no attributes, how do you know what it is?
The same reason I know logical absolutes exist. God is the first cause, guys.
But you can demonstrate a logical absolute. This jar is not a dog.
You're just using buzzwords right now. You've used the buzzword first cause, and when asked what it is, you say God is logical absolutes are part of his nature. You're just tossing around buzzwords that make no sense. You haven't formed anything that represents any kind of argument. It's an assertion with some buzzwords followed by a description, and then when questioned as to how you know about it, you just go back to the same old stuff. Pick
Okay. I
pick
think I know
any
what
one thing, define what the hell it is you're talking about, and maybe we can talk about it.
Okay, what I'm talking about. Okay, we'll just... Oh, great. I'll just do it real fast. You go back to the very beginning, the singularity, it presupposes a creator. And how do we know that?
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does. Well, let me explain why.
Okay, no, it doesn't. You want to keep doing that for the next 5 minutes? You're saying that the singularity presupposes a creator. And what we're saying is we don't know enough about the singularity to make any kind of statement even remotely
Oh, that's
like
not
that.
true. We do have enough information.
No, it's
about
not.
Can I explain to you the evidence then?
Yes, please.
The space-time
and you can get a
theorem of
fucking
general-
Nobel Prize for it.
That's right.
The space-time theorem of general relativity specifically says that all time, matter, and space happened at the Big Bang, and before it was nothing. So obviously
Does it
that's
say there was
something.
nothing before it? It does not say there was nothing before that.
There's no time. There's no time, matter, or space.
Oh, that's different than
before it.
nothing.
I never said absolutely nothing. I never
Oh, so
said
there's
that.
There's a difference between nothing and absolutely
There's nothing,
nothing.
and see, this is a jar full of nothing.
saying
This is
there's
a
no
jar
time.
full of absolutely nothing, and you're done. But you know, once upon a time, one of the most popular clips from the show, and one of my favorite examples was when you brought in the jars of dice.
Dice, yeah.
And you're going to kind of do something remotely related today.
Yeah, we have another demo with dice. Fun with dice. Okay, so standard size, like 6-sided regular die, like you buy at the store in the gaming section. 1 through 6 on it, no tricks. It's not weighted. It's just normal.
I'll take your word for it for
from
now.
the grocery store. Yeah. Observe.
I'll take it on faith.
All right, so based on what you know, I mean, you're familiar with dice, right? You probably use them in Magic, and you do some gaming things with. And so, based on what you know about this die, is it possible to roll a 3?
Yes.
How do you know that?
Well, because we know that there are 6 numbers on the side and that any of them could possibly come up. And I've rolled a 3 before with similar objects and seen them rolled.
Okay. And if we had, well, is it possible to roll a 5?
It would seem so, yes.
Probably for the same reasons.
Yep.
And we could probably roll a 7 too.
No.
We couldn't?
Not on one die.
I don't understand.
Well, there's only the numbers 1 through 6, so you couldn't possibly get a 7.
Oh, you know what I forgot to tell you?
Oh.
We have infinite rolls.
Oh, okay. So then you would roll and then roll again and add it together.
No. I mean, each time I roll, that would be 1 roll, and that would only count once. But there's infinite rolls, so now can I roll a 7?
No.
Why?
Because each individual roll has the same possibilities as the first.
But not a 7.
Not a 7.
Okay, well, all right, let me try this another way. I've got this bag,
Okay.
and you don't know what's in this bag.
That's correct.
You don't, because I did it when you weren't looking. And I'm going to take this die, oops, and I'm going to put it in the bag.
Okay.
Now, Is it possible to roll an 18 with whatever's in this bag?
I don't know.
Well, if you don't know, then it must be possible.
No, that not necessarily.
Well, oh, I forgot to tell you. Whatever's in the bag, we get to roll it infinite times.
Which doesn't change anything, because it could still just be the one die in there, which means the only possible outcomes are 1 through 6.
But this bag is big enough to hold 3 dice, which would roll an 18. So is it possible to roll an 18 with what's in this bag?
Well, I don't know what's in the bag, so I can't say that it's possible to roll an 18 with what's in the bag. What I could say is that if there were 3 dice in the bag, then it would be possible to roll an 18.
Okay, so not knowing doesn't mean that it's possible.
Correct.
You'd have to know something that informed you to be able to justify the possibility, sort of like what you were describing with the sides to the die.
I also can't say it's impossible.
Okay, well, if it's not impossible, then it's possible.
No, well, as a matter as what it actually is, yes, but what we believe about it, whether or not we are justified in claiming that it's possible, no.
So, but if somebody said this, so if somebody could say it's possible, and then, but they're not justified?
Yes.
So, I don't know how many are in here, and you don't know how many are in here. Now, we're talking about this kind of a die, right?
Okay.
Since you don't know how many are in there, I mean, there could be 1 million in there, right?
Well, there couldn't be 1 million in there.
But you don't know how many are in there, so how can you say that?
Well, assuming we're talking about dice of the size you showed me,
These.
Without measuring, I can still estimate that you couldn't fit 1 million of them into that bag.
Probably because of what you know about volume, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, all right, let me just see. So somebody might say, okay, it's possible you could roll an 18. And when you're saying they're not justified in that, but they might still say it. They might still believe it, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so what I'm doing is I'm dumping out the contents of the bag. And that's pretty much it. So if somebody were to say that it was possible to roll an 18, they would in fact be wrong.
Yes.
I mean, it's not just anymore a matter, now that we know what's in the bag, it's not a matter of even saying, you know, might they have been wrong before. They were actually wrong even when they were saying it was possible, because
Yes.
it was impossible. And it sounds to me like they're calling something that's impossible, possible. Isn't that what they did?
It would seem so, yeah.
Well, that's quite a little trick. And when you say it's not, you're saying it's not impossible, but you can't say it's possible. You mean you can't say it's impossible. It is clearly impossible to roll the 18.
I reject their claim that it's possible.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that I'm claiming it's impossible.
Okay.
Because I don't have enough knowledge to determine whether or not it's possible or impossible.
But from a realistic standpoint, from everything that we knew about that situation, we really couldn't make a claim that it's possible or impossible. And the fact that we couldn't say that it was impossible at the time didn't mean that it was valid to call an 18 roll from 2 dice possible.
Correct.
And in fact, to have said that it was possible would mean that you were in fact wrong, wrong about your assessment. And it also means that you use the word possible to describe things that are impossible, because that's what we just did. We said that if somebody were to call it possible based on the fact that they don't know, and based on the fact that there could be 3 die in there, what they just did was label the possible, or label the impossible as possible.
Which is why there's a fallacy that is the argument from ignorance fallacy, which isn't about being stupid.
Okay.
It's about you don't know,
Right.
and because you can't, because somebody can't demonstrate that your claim is false, you go ahead and claim that it's true.
But I didn't say it was true. I said it was possible.
Oh, well, sure. But you're claiming that it's true that it is possible.
I see. And the reason that I brought this demo up, there's a lot of things that this can apply to. But the reason that I'm bringing it up is because specifically I hear this argument from people who say, oh, what if there are infinite universes? Since God is possible, that means at least one of those universes has a God. And my question to them is always, how do you know that a God is possible? You don't know that. And you're asserting it, but have you justified that yet? And I think for a lot of people, they don't even think about the idea of requiring a justification for a possibility.
Yeah, it's kind of this, anything's possible is first of all one of the kind of tropes that gets into people's mind. Anything's possible. Well, no, that's not true. Give me one of those dice and we can roll, and we're never going to roll anything other than a 1 through 6 on it.
Right.
We're not going to roll a -4.
Right.
Just not going to happen. And so this idea that anything's possible is false. And then, as you're pointing out, this extension of, well, you can't demonstrate that it's impossible, so I must be justified in thinking that it's possible, which is just a straight up argument from ignorance.
Right.
Fallacy, which, again, for those who aren't familiar, that doesn't mean you're stupid. Although, if you repeatedly commit those fallacies after having them explained to you and continue to get it wrong, you might actually maybe be stupid.
Okay.
But I don't know how many people that apply to.
So
The thing is, we're all stupid about various
Yeah.
things, or we're all ignorant about various things at various times. And it's one of the reasons why we do these shows and have these conversations, is to kind of open people's minds to some of the
and I mean, possible may
discussions.
be less committal than believe or than
Yeah.
know, but it is still a commitment to a position, and it still requires justification. And if someone's going to call something possible, they have to do better than show that you can't demonstrate it's impossible.
Yeah.
That's no different than saying it exists because you can't demonstrate it doesn't exist. It doesn't become possible just because just because Matt couldn't demonstrate that there weren't 3 dice in the bag did not make it possible to roll the 18. Just doesn't. So when you're going to say God is possible, you're going to have to come to the table with a little bit of evidence about how you came to that conclusion, or even justification of some kind that's going to have to be, somewhat aligned with the reality of things that exist.
And probably start with some sort of definition of what you mean by God. And then we'll have to go on to what you mean by exists.
Right.
Because, you had that conversation a while back of just the very proposition, some God exists, or just God exists.
Yeah.
Both of those two terms have to be clearly understood, because quite often we're not talking about the same thing when we engage with callers.
So if you're confronted with this, please don't take your inability to demonstrate something is impossible as a requirement on your part to allow anyone to claim anything is possible regardless of what they're claiming. You don't have to show that it's impossible. You merely have to ask for their justification for asserting that they know this is possible.
And this actually goes to a discussion of burden of proof. And I got an email this week. Let me, what the heck? Let's try doing a live email on the air thing, because as long as I can get to this, it would be nice to actually answer it.
While you're looking for it, I'm just going to say, I mean, the question that I'm asking basically is, how do they intend to show that there is a God side on this die?
Yeah.
They have to show that there is a God that can roll. And if they can't, then they're just saying that rolling a 7 is possible, or that it's just as good as saying that you could roll a 6. And it's just like, no, I don't see that 7, so I don't know that you could roll a 7 there. So if you're going to claim that God is possible, he's got to be on one of those sides, and you're going to have to show me how you know that.
So the email that came in was, hello, Mr. Dillahunty. I learned in a philosophy course that the burden of proof is on the one who contradicts your presumption. Now, I didn't immediately attack that first sentence, although I will here. That's simply not true. That applies to conversational arguments about, I want to change your position. My question is more to whether or not your presumption is rationally justified. And he goes on to say, if I believe in a God and you want to convince me God does not exist, you have the burden of proof. I agree. If I want to convince you that God exists and you do not believe that he does, then the burden of proof is on me. I agree. If we try to convince each other of opposite positions on the existence of God, then we both have a burden of proof. And he continues on, but I won't read through all of it, because my response was, you misunderstand my position. Atheism is not the positive claim that there are no gods. It's the rejection of the claim that some God exists. If I was trying to convince people that there were no gods, you would be correct. I would have a burden of proof. But I'm not trying to convince people that there are no gods. I'm pointing out that the various God claims have failed to meet their burden of proof, and therefore belief is not yet rationally justified. And he wrote back and he said, so if I understand correctly, an atheist does not believe in God, makes no positive claim that there is a God, but he also does not believe there is no God. That sounds like agnosticism to me. So for clarity, atheism is divided into a couple different categories: soft and hard atheism, weak and strong atheism. The strong, hard atheism position is one that I've often labeled anti-theism. I have a video on YouTube explaining why I do that. The nuts and bolts of it, the minimal qualification to be an atheist is to not believe that a God exists, to reject the theistic proposition.
All atheists do not believe a God exists.
There are, though, atheists who go a step further and actually believe that there are no gods, and that is the strong atheist or anti-theistic position. But it is not... that is not the position that is the minimal one for atheism. Now, the reason it sounds like agnosticism to you is because a lot of people have posited this view of agnosticism as some sort of middle ground between theism and atheism. There is no middle ground between theism and atheism. There is no middle ground between belief, I believe, and I do not believe. There's just not. You either believe or you don't. Now, the reason you think this is because of the, the kind of, I guess, marketing that's been done with the agnostic label. And Gnosticism and agnosticism address a question of knowledge, whereas theism and atheism address a question of belief. And if you dig around, you'll find out that knowledge is a subset of belief. And so if we're talking about the proposition that a God exists, you either believe, in which case you're a theist, or you do not believe, in which case you're an atheist. And if you believe that the claim is actually false, you would be a strong atheist or anti-theist. And in nowhere in this conversation do we mention the terms Gnostic or agnostic, and that's because we're talking about what you believe about a claim, not what you know or claim to know about a claim. And so that's the quick and dirty answer to Pavel's question. And I don't know if you had more, or if we just wanted to jump into callers.
No, I think that's it. That's all I had.
The content of this video is produced by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. If you enjoyed this content and are willing and able to provide a donation, please visit the website below. And actually, I have to do this real quick, I promise. For people who've been watching clips on YouTube, if this clip happens to make it to YouTube, it's worth pointing out that you can watch the entire show by going to the website, www.atheist-experience.com, as well as archive shows by clicking on the show archive there. Most of them are on Google Video, some of them are on Blip TV.